I wanted to make another dedicated video to Julius Evola. My Plight of the Neophyte video, I think, wasn't dedicated enough. Largely, this is a summary of one of the most important lectures, I believe, of all time, which was Jonathan Bowden's lecture on Julius Evola at the conference of the New Right in, I believe, the UK, at some point in the early 90s. Largely, I've summarized that lecture as I think it is so vital to the study of metaphysics and very important in today's world to understand. I also then took my own spin on Evola and how he relates to the backbone of the intellectual dark web ideologies and individuals who are participating in that kind of realm at the moment. Okay, so Julius Evola was a philosopher who rejected the modern world in a metaphysical way. He and traditionalists reject materialistic and anti-spiritual views that dominate modern society, instead believing in metaphysical objectivism, which is an absolute belief in the supernatural, gods, goddesses, and certain forms of language and spiritual culture that exist outside of man. The Evolian tradition practices perennialism, which is the idea that all major religions contain certain key truths. The tradition also emphasizes the ethnic and racial differences in how people perceive reality, form different religions, and have different cultural myths. And this is an interesting point because we can see his affiliation with the Nazi Party at one point, and then I believe kind of getting excommunicated later on. It's just an example of, or a testament of how you cannot put Evola into one box. Today, in the political sphere, people try to put him in a far-right category, and people on 4chan are very much aligned with some of Evola's teachings, but to say he is just a conservative, I don't think his ideology fits into any political understanding of today's world because he's so rooted in metaphysics. People might call him a traditionalist. I don't think it's really, when we think about traditionalists in today's society, we think of maybe people moving out to Idaho to go homestead with, having as many kids as possible and being kind of rooted in that Western or American tradition, but that's not exactly at all what I see Evola as or ever having practiced. While some perennialists may adopt a universalist perspective, the tradition seeks to avoid sectarianism and negative Puritanism in religious structures. Evola's ideas are characterized by an aristocratic worldview that values certain professions and activities over others. He believed that warriors, religious leaders, farmers, intellectuals, scholars, and artists are superior to those who solely focus on economics. He valued individualistic sports like fencing and mountaineering because they involve preparing for and executing dangerous tasks, which creates an extraordinary sense of self-overcoming and esoteric enlightenment. Evola believed that contemporary society is too focused on what others think, and instead people should look to the traditions and beliefs of the aristocratic class. Evola's ideas entered the English-speaking world through the occult and individualistic forms of religiosity. He believed that mass religion involves a small priesthood that kind of dictates your views, whereas the religiosity he focused on was individualistic and voltaic. Evola did not believe in progress or scientific evolution, but instead believed in looking upwards towards an aristocratic view rather than a mass, middling perspective. He saw a dialectic between the priest, the warrior, and the religious believer as essential to avoiding decadence in religious organizations. It is interesting to see how the ideas of Julius Evola and the Evolian tradition have influenced contemporary culture, particularly in the realm of the intellectual dark web. Figures like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson are known for their emphasis on physical and mental self-improvement through activities like hunting, martial arts, mountaineering, I would say, and even taking psychedelic substances. So these practices align greatly with Evola's emphasis on individualistic sports and self-overcoming as a means of attaining a heroic spirit, or in my previous videos I referred to it as that trial by fire, which I think is appropriate in a sense because Evola often referred to the eternal flame of tradition that goes back to the pagan faiths of Romans, keeping this symbolic fire burning. And it was, interestingly enough, if you're into gaming, we can see that idea. And honestly, many of the metaphysical notions Evola and other early philosophers put forward with this flame tradition we see in the Elden Ring series and Dark Souls, which is a whole video on itself. But Elden Ring and the Dark Souls over at From Software are 1000% occultists and very deeply have studied the metaphysics and esotericism. I will definitely have to make a video on that if you're interested. But just to end my little spin-off from the lecture here, additionally, both Rogan and Peterson have been critical of liberalism and its rejection of metaphysical beliefs. This rejection of liberalism is a shared sentiment among many in the intellectual dark web, who are more interested in exploring mysteries of the unknown, such as ancient civilizations and the potential benefits of psychedelics, rather than adhering to the mainstream liberal perspective. To wrap up a dedicated video on Julius Evola, I'd be remiss not to mention his beliefs or views on the metaphysics of war, which centered around the idea that war is a natural and necessary part of human existence, and that it's not merely a physical struggle with guns and swords, ammunition, etc., but it's a spiritual one as well. Evola believed that war had transformative power that can elevate individuals and societies to higher levels of consciousness and being. He saw war that allowed individuals to transcend their limited sense of self and to connect with a higher transcendent reality. He saw war as a means of awakening the warrior spirit within individuals and societies, and as a way to purify and strengthen your will. Evola also believed that war is a reflection of the cosmic struggle between order and chaos, and that it is the duty of the warrior to fight on the side of order and uphold the traditional values of his culture. Evola's metaphysics of war emphasizes the importance of spiritual and cultural values in warfare, and sees war as a means of transcending the limitations of the individual self and connecting with a higher transcendent reality. Very interesting book from Evola. One of my favorites of his, The Metaphysics of War, also probably one of the most famous ones. Fascinating take, also probably one of his most controversial takes, other than his book, which I believe is banned in some avenues, but the Myth of the Blood, which was a book that he kind of went into deeper context on his teachings of race, ethnicity, and how they perceive the world. I wouldn't say it's racist in nature. Maybe some elements of the book could be seen as that today, sure. But I think my main point is that it's just looking at how you were born into the world, what is preordained by this metaphysical world of tradition, whether that exists or not is up to you and your understanding. But obviously to perennialists and to Evola and Evolian followers, they certainly believed in aspects of that tradition and that metaphysical reality and law. Thank you for listening. Leave some comments about any topics that you'd like me to cover in the future, whether it's another philosopher that is involved in esotericism, or just any topic in general, feel free to leave any ideas. Take care.